There's a number that quietly runs the modern internet, and almost nobody ever agreed to it. That number is you. Specifically, everything you look at, buy, hesitate over, and scroll past. For about 2 decades, an entire economy was built on a single bet. That ordinary people would never actually push back. Not that they'd approve of being tracked, just that they'd never bothered to stop it. And for a long time, that bet paid out beautifully. But the thing about betting your whole business on public apathy is that apathy is not a permanent condition. It's a mood. And the mood just changed. Here's what's happening right now, and why it's genuinely funny to watch. Tracking companies are starting to lose their grip, not because some elite team of hackers declared war on them, but because regular, non-technical people got irritated enough to tap a single button. That's the whole rebellion. No manifestos, no coordinated campaign. Just millions of exhausted users independently deciding they'd had enough of being followed around and reaching for the nearest tool that made it stop. And that quiet, undramatic choice is doing something remarkable. It's making some very large, very profitable companies panic. To understand why they're panicking, it helps to remember that this didn't start out sinister. Rewind to the early web and tracking was almost innocent. It was a counting tool. Someone wanted to know how many visitors landed on their page today versus yesterday. That's it. But somewhere along the way, a realization set in that if you could follow a person from that one page across the entire rest of the internet, you could turn that trail into an astonishing amount of money. So they did. They started sewing invisible trackers into everything, and I mean everything. Open a plain blog post today, and half the time, your phone is quietly pinging dozens of separate companies to report what you're reading. 50 different strangers notified, just because you clicked a headline. The part that ages the worst is how confident they were that it would last. They constructed a sprawling, invisible surveillance network and genuinely assumed that a 50-page terms of service document, the kind no human being has ever read to the end, was a strong enough wall to keep everyone permanently in the dark. For years, it was. Nobody looked under the hood. Nobody asked why a flashlight app needed their location. And then the vibe shifted, and it shifted in the most ordinary way imaginable. People started noticing the seams. You mention out loud that you want a new pair of shoes, and within hours, your feed is wall-to-wall shoes. You search for something one time, and it haunts you across 5 apps. What used to feel vaguely convenient started feeling like being watched through a window. That's the moment the illusion broke, not because of a scandal, but because the tracking got sloppy enough to be noticeable. And once people noticed, they didn't organize a movement. They just started downloading things, browser extensions, private browsers, tracker blockers, millions of individual small refusals, all pointing the same direction. This is the structural weakness these companies never accounted for. Their entire empire was built on one fragile material: blind trust. Not encryption, not superior technology, trust. And the instant people stopped extending it, the whole structure started to fracture, because there was never anything underneath it but the assumption that you wouldn't ask questions. Now here's where it gets embarrassing for them. The tools ordinary people are using have quietly become powerful, and that's produced some of the most spectacular corporate faceplants I've seen. Take the tracking pixel. It's a tiny invisible dot tucked onto a web page whose only job is to silently record what you do there. For years, massive companies were dropping these pixels onto places you'd never expect them. Streaming platforms, healthcare websites, shopping services, and quietly shipping your viewing habits, your purchase history, your browsing activity straight back to the big tech giants. Most users had no idea, but then independent researchers started pulling the thread. Privacy advocates dug in, lawyers noticed, regular users connected the dots, and the fallout has been genuinely fun to watch. Company after company getting hauled into class action lawsuits, caught with their hand jammed all the way into the cookie jar, and it's gone way past just blocking ads. People are stacking real tools now, VPNs and private relays to obscure their internet traffic. I use one myself. Browser protections that strangle tracking scripts before they load. Email aliases so that a company can't quietly link every one of your accounts back to a single identity. Each of these used to be a niche thing for the paranoid. Now, they're just what normal people do. There's one more piece worth naming because it's picking up real momentum. Global Privacy Control, or GPC. Think of it as a universal no built directly into your browser. A signal that automatically tells every website not to sell or share your data without you lifting a finger. And here's the part that terrifies the industry. Regulators in states like California and Colorado are now forcing companies to honor that browser signal, which means users no longer have to crawl through some deliberately confusing settings menu to opt out one site at a time. The opt-out travels with you. Opt-out. It's deeply satisfying to watch the people who once felt completely untouchable suddenly scrambling to explain themselves, all because ordinary users collectively said enough. On the back end, this is turning into a genuine nightmare for the tech industry, and the reason is simple. It's a cat and mouse game now, and the mouse finally learned the rules. Every time these companies invent a sneakier new way to watch you, the whole ecosystem adapts around it. Privacy tools update, browsers patch, regulators respond, lawsuits pile up, and public awareness spreads. They're no longer playing against a clueless audience that'll absorb any workaround. They're playing against people who are actively looking for the next trick. And the resistance isn't only defensive anymore. People aren't just blocking new tracking. They're going back to demolish the old records too. Users are so done with their information being bought and resold that they've started using data broker removal tools to mass delete their profiles from people's search sites and broker databases. Picture running a business whose entire inventory is personal profiles you've quietly collected, and then watching a growing crowd of people realize they can legally demand deletion, hire removal services, and make your inventory rot faster than you can rebuild it. That's the position data brokers are now in. Let's be honest about scope, though. The internet's plumbing hasn't been magically repaired. Tracking isn't dead, but the power dynamic, that's what's actually shifting. We're moving from a world of effortless, invisible, one-sided surveillance to one where user resistance genuinely counts for something. And watching these companies lose their composure over it, over people installing a free extension, flipping on a privacy relay, using an alias, ticking an opt-out box, is honestly comedy of the highest order. Because it exposes the real secret. The tracking and data broker industries were never running on brilliant technology. They were running on your ignorance. And the moment that ignorance started to fade, so did their bottom line. Step all the way back. And here's the big picture. What we're watching is a fundamental rebalancing of power on the internet, and the industry did it entirely to itself. The era of frictionless, invisible data harvesting is cracking, and it's cracking for one reason. Greed. If they'd shown even a little restraint, almost nobody would have cared enough to fight. But they pushed so far, so shamelessly, that privacy tools stopped being optional and became a basic necessity of daily life. And the best part, you don't have to be a genius to defend yourself anymore. The tools are built right into your browser, your phone, your apps. Ad blockers aren't a hobby for computer nerds. Private browsers aren't just for the paranoid. Email aliases aren't just for hackers. They've become mainstream resistance tools, used by completely ordinary people who are simply worn out by the modern web. So that's it for this one. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.